Um, Hello, Earthtopia. So, what sparked your idea of trying to help the environment?
So for me, it happened when I was at uni. So I actually went to Cardiff Uni, and I volunteered for a recycling charity whilst I was there because I got a bit fed up with all the rubbish that was left around halls. So we used to go around and basically help students who are moving out reduce their waste by like either selling it or making sure they were recycling it properly. And then when I left uni, I started volunteering with some charities. So I volunteered at the Wildlife Trust, London Wildlife Trust in King's Cross. And then I also volunteered with conservation volunteers, which was really fun. So I was out in nature kind of helping the environment. And from there, I kind of felt like I was really enjoying it. So I wanted to kind of pursue that more, which eventually led me to getting a job, related to sustainability.
And then for me, I grew up in Dorset, so like right down on the south coast of England. So the beach was like a 15-minute walk away from my house, pretty much. So I think nature played a really key part in my upbringing, and it was really evident, like over the past few years, of how much the beaches around me were changing. As I left home and like each time I went back, you could really see how much the coast was changing. So I think that was always kind of really evidence for me throughout my upbringing. So I went on to study international development at uni. And that was the kind of really key part for me. I studied how kind of countries across the world are developing, how they're progressing, and the kind of infrastructures that they're building, and the role that climate change is playing on this. So that was really important for me in kind of learning about not only what climate change is and how it's happening, but what I could do kind of through my career to help make a difference on that.
Back to Rob's point, do you think there are any enough policies in universities and campuses and around littering?
I mean, when I was there, it wasn't very, this is about 10 years ago, so I feel a bit old saying it, but it wasn't really front and center. And it was quite, I did notice it a lot. People dump stuff a lot, which, like by bins, and the recycling in general, I think across the UK, for instance, is just quite poor, particularly the fact that even living in London, which is where I live, all different boroughs have different rules for recycling. So it's really difficult for all these people going to uni where the rules are completely different to what they're experiencing at home. So I do think there isn't really enough policy in place to kind of prevent littering, but also to help with people recycle more.
Could I reflect on Michael's point? As in, could I ask if were there like council litter picks going on the beaches in Dorset, or?
So I'm quite fortunate actually. The beaches that I live on, they tend to be really, really clean. So litter picks weren't such an important thing. I think plastic isn't something that I'd come across that often. I think during the summer when the beaches are really packed out with tourists, you would see more like chip wrappers or plastic bottles, something left over. But for most of the year, plastic didn't play a big part in that. It was more the way that you would literally see in like the physical landscape starting to change and look different.
The next question is, who or what inspired you to start Earthtopia?
So we started Earthtopia about 18 months ago. And I think it was just a kind of collective tiredness of the way that climate change is spoken about. I think it's so driven by negative stories and kind of doom and gloom headlines. And it can get really on top of you and just puts you down. And I think puts a lot of people off taking an action. So I think we saw an opportunity to kind of flip that on its head and talk about the really positive stuff that's happening, celebrate those wins that are going on, but also kind of a platform to answer people's questions and be a bit interactive. I think so often people are put off by the kind of eco labels because they don't know how to do something, or they don't know what products to use, or they don't know how to do things differently. So we just wanted to create a kind of positive space where a community could ask us questions and we could interact with them, and we could kind of develop our knowledge together of different ways that we can all kind of act to help the planet.
Yeah. Okay.
Could I just ask something? What sort of responses did you get to that? Like, did you get a lot of backlash, or was everyone just really interested to help?
I think on the whole, our comment section is really, really positive, which is like a big driving force in us continuing to make content and continue to make the videos that we do. It's so inspiring and encouraging to see so many people saying so many different things, and just how kind of we're helping tackle their eco anxiety a little bit, or how they've found a new product based on one of our videos or something like that. The only thing that we kind of consistently get negativity around is the old vegan labels. The people of TikTok are quite split in their opinions towards vegans. So I think that's the only thing that I'd say we ever really get negative comments towards.
And especially on TikTok, I look at a lot of younger people use it. So how do you feel that you know that you're inspiring young people to help the environment with your TikTok videos?
I think it's the amount of time that Mike and I put into the videos, researching and shooting them, like the fact that it's having a positive impact is really great. And I think for young people particularly, there's so much pressure on young people at the moment, particularly just being young is difficult anyway. You know, being a teenager, there's so much going on in your life, you know, going through school and everything. I think having climate change on top of that is such a big pressure. And I think being so interconnected with the world, you know, how we are through social media and the news, you can see all this imagery and, you know, video of wildfires and you know, fish dying from, like, you know, plastic nets and stuff like that. So it's so rewarding knowing that the stuff we're doing on TikTok is helping young people to, you know, live more sustainably or feel inspired and feel positive about, you know, the planet, because there is a lot of doom at the moment related to it. So yeah, I feel really grateful that we have this opportunity to talk to like such a big young audience.
I completely agree. And I think it's just so amazing to be able, like, young people are the future, aren't like climate change is a topic that we're going to have to engage with for years to come, and to have the opportunity to kind of be able to interact with young people who are whatever part of their climate journey they're on, seeing consistent like positive comments or that kind of reinforces the worth of the content that we're making. And it's just so amazing knowing that people are seeing our content and being inspired to kind of take an action, however big or small that may be.
Well, with my TikTok, I do quite a things with climate change, but I found it's quite hard to get followers to do with that subject, because a lot of TikTokers are dancers and do stuff that don't deserve likes. So how have you grown your audience?
I mean, we've adopted lots of trial and error. I'd say we've tried lots of different things, and you know, we found that, for instance, we do these environment wins on a Friday every week, which basically is like a good news roundup. So this week, here's, you know, a new species that's recovered or been discovered. You know, here's some new solar farm or wind farm that's been created. So we find that content has done really well, and that's helped grow our community, because people do want to see good news, because there isn't tons of it at the moment. You know, with COVID happening as well, I think that's been a huge focus. Brexit before that, so we've kind of found a little bit of a niche there that people are, you know, really happy to hear about the wins. But also, I mean, we try and tap into trends. Like we don't turn our noses up at stuff on. Me and Mike aren't the biggest dancers, but you know, we try and do stuff that looks native to TikTok, so it doesn't feel like we're trying to, you know, use the platform for something else. I think the point of our channel is that we want the content that we make to feel really authentic and feel like it's just another TikTok account that you'll follow and you'll be inspired by. So we try and get a bit funny sometimes with it, but yeah, not so much dancing.
I think it's just amazing that people have got the opportunity to create content on topics that they find are important. So like before we started Earthtopia, myself and Rob and the rest of the Earthtopia team were just kind of people who are interested in sustainability. And through TikTok, we were able to talk about the things that we were passionate about, and we were able to amass a following who kind of resonated with that message that we're talking about. So I think Greta is someone that Greta Thunberg does a really good job of kind of embodying that message, where she was just a girl who was passionate about a subject, and now millions of people kind of follow her messages, and she's become a real kind of shining light in eco circles. So I think on TikTok often you can kind of get drawn into that oh, but this person's just got 10 million views on that video. But I think it's also really amazing that one, people have just got the opportunity to talk about these subjects, and people will engage with that, and you can constantly interact with new people. So I think that's really great.
How do you feel about the plastic that gets wasted with like single-use PPE and masks? And what do you think should be done?
I think it's a really interesting question. So one thing that does frustrate me is the amount of masks that you see thrown, on the ground or in the environment. I know at the moment they're even pulling it out of the ocean, in massive amounts. So that's really frustrating, because obviously there are reusable masks available which you can use, that you can keep for years and years, and just keep washing. So I would recommend that everyone adopts a reusable mask over single-use mask. But I think with stuff like, it's very easy for us to focus in on stuff that we all see at the moment. COVID tests, there's a lot of plastic in that, but it needs to be cheap and it needs to be sterile. So there's no real alternative at the moment towards using plastic with regards to that kind of stuff. So I think we kind of need to focus our attention more on the pointless plastic that we see everywhere. So when you go to the supermarket and all, the food is wrapped, all the veg and fruit is wrapped in endless amounts of plastic. I think it's more important that we as a society, put pressure on supermarkets and big corporations that pollute, like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, because they have the money and they have the power to make those changes. And there are changes happening in supermarkets, particularly, that they're trying to bring in less packaging. But I think it's super important that we focus on those first, and eventually, if we do start using alternatives to plastic, seaweed and stuff like potato starch are starting to come about a bit more. Eventually, if that becomes mainstream, becomes cheap, it can be used. It will probably start being used by the medical industry, and it will be you might start seeing more of that in a medical setting. So I think it's really important to sort of target the industries that we know and can change and have the money to change first.
So you were talking about industries that need to change. We have a very slightly related question. What are your favorite ecological brands that have probably sometimes changed from polluting industries and to ecological methods? So
there's tons that I think Mike and I can think of, because we do often do videos on them. But some of my favorites are, there's a company called Wild Deodorants. They basically create do you know them? Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, they're refillable deodorants. They deliver them in biodegradable packaging to your house, however often you want it. It's all natural scents, and that to me has completely revolutionized deodorant. Like, you don't have to use aerosols, which are bad for the air quality. You don't have to use plastic or metal containers. So that's a really good example. Another one I just wanted to call out was Etsy. So I feel like with Amazon being so big at the moment, Etsy's kind of like combating that a bit. So it supports obviously smaller companies, and I find whenever I buy something off Etsy, it always comes in cardboard packaging. They're very good at not having plastic, whereas Amazon's usually the opposite. So I would say Etsy is really good for supporting small local businesses that aren't polluting as well.
I think for me, it's slightly unorthodox, but I think it's people like Depop or Vinted or secondhand clothes outlets like that. I think fast fashion has such a massive impact on the environment, and something as simple as buying secondhand can make such a big difference in reducing the carbon footprint of the life cycle of a piece of clothing. So I buy pretty much all my clothes from charity shops or Depop or something like that, because I also just really I think it gives me, I can never find on the high street the clothes that I want to buy. I'm not the type of person who's from Love Island and wears that style of clothes. So I think buying on Depop or Vinted or somewhere like there is a really nice way of me finding the clothes that I like, but I also know that nothing's had to be made for me to buy that. So I think it's makes it a really unique shopping experience.
So what do you think's impacting the environment the most?
For me, there's two main things. The first is politicians. So I think politicians that don't act, that aren't, voting for sustainable reform and stuff like that. I mean, in the US, for instance, I know Biden's trying to bring in a big sort of climate bill, which will, completely transform their energy sector to renewable and all these other, features of it. And I think there's one Republican senator who's opposing it, and it's basically having to be watered down because of him. So that one guy is completely affecting years and trillions worth of investment in a renewable future. So I could talk for ages about how our government is pretty inept at the moment, particularly Boris Johnson. And there was so much talk around COP and it being this moment for the UK to like really take a stand, and it didn't really materialize. But my second thing, I reckon, for the biggest impact on the environment would be fossil fuels. So the burning of them, the drilling of them, the plastic it makes from fossil fuels, all the studies and all the science says that we need to stop exploring for new fossil fuel. We need to transition to renewable energy, and we need to stop wean ourselves off plastic. So I think those two and those two kind of go hand in hand. The government subsidizes so many fossil fuel companies at the moment. There's so many billions and trillions of dollars and pounds that are invested into fossil fuel in your banks, and political parties and things like that. So I think if we can kind of shape, or we can shift those two areas, then it will have a really good impact on the planet.
Just to answer to your final part about like industries and having to change, go environmental. In a previous episode, we discussed whether we should take right off it, just rule it out completely. But then we decided that might have been a bad choice, because if you, what do you think? Like, if would we have to, like, again, as you said with plastic, like wean off fossil fuel, sort of?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. You can't just overnight completely switch systems, and I realize that there's a hell of a lot of stuff made from plastic that we need, and we, for instance, even with the food debate, it does actually it prevents food waste because it keeps it fresher for longer. So it's a very grey area, that kind of completely shutting down industries and reforming them. But I just think when these big corporations, like I mentioned Coca-Cola earlier, but when they've made billions off of plastic, and basically it's like Evian or water companies, they don't sell water, they sell plastic water bottles. That is their product. So it should be their duty to remove that from the environment, recycle it, make sure it's all recycled, but also just trying to look into alternative materials that are more sustainable. But it's a very difficult question, I think. I don't know, Mike, do you have any more to add?
I think it's just such a complex equation, because the power that so many of these companies have to kind of make these decisions for us. I think there is so much exciting green tech out there that has huge potential. Even something as simple as solar farms or wind farms or anything like that. We could, in theory, start using that almost immediately on such a big scale. But the fossil fuel industries form a massive blocker in the policies and the funding for those industries. So it's such a kind of unique jigsaw that needs to be pulled apart and completely reframed.
So what Earthtopia accomplishment are you most proud of?
I was talking to Mike earlier, and we just were discussing how this is actually our first ever podcast interview. So that's a pretty cool achievement that we're pretty proud of. But I think for me, I went to Youth COP last year in Glasgow, which was incredible. So I met lots of young, passionate climate leaders and activists who, really inspired me and galvanized me to kind of want to fight and do more for the planet. But just in terms of what we were saying about the community and young people, for me personally, seeing people commenting on our posts saying, this has really helped me get through the week, or this has really helped with my eco-anxiety, that is so rewarding. And I feel so, again, grateful that I can our content is having a positive impact on people's actions and people's mental health. Comments as well is just a really big part of, if anyone's given you love on a video, and we put a lot of effort into them. So it's just really nice that people are feeling better from it, because I know it's tough at the moment.
And then for me, it was definitely, I got to go to COP26 in November, I remember when I arrived there, I literally phoned my mum and was like, "Mum, I'm at COP. Like, how crazy is this?" I think as someone who's been passionate about the environment for so long, actually being there it really like just blew my mind. Particularly being at the climate protest, I think that was something that I'll probably never forget. I think as an environmentalist, often you don't feel like you necessarily always conform to that the popular opinions, or often your voices might kind of stand differently to what your friends thought when you were growing up or something like that. So I think just being surrounded by literally tens of thousands of people who I knew thought the same way that I did and were like pro the same changes that I thought are really important. I think that was just crazy. And things like seeing there was a group of Indigenous people who lined the front of the protest, and just seeing such kind of important people whose voices so often go unheard, and who are so impacted by the climate crisis. It was just kind of, it was just amazing to be in the presence of people like that, and so many people who thought in that way.
Trying to get. Do you think TikTok is a good platform to share your content?
So I think you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. So it's important to recognize that TikTok's not without its flaws. I think there are so many kind of preferences in terms of the body types or the voices that the app wants to share. And I think that can be quite dangerous. I think the idea that you're always making content and you've got to get as many likes as you can also be quite intimidating for so many people, in that you're constantly comparing yourself to other people, and you're constantly saying, I've got to reach the same targets that these other people have kind of achieved. I think that can be quite a big thing for everyone to tackle, alongside things like climate change and eco-anxiety going on alongside that. But I think, having said that, I think for young people and for climate change, it is such a unique space for anyone nearly to be able to make content and to be able to reach an audience of people who might resonate with them and be interested in the same things. So I think things like having the Q&A function, where you can ask almost any creator a question and they've got the potential to answer your question. I think growing up, I would have just loved the opportunity to have that opportunity to ask important people in kind of climate circles questions. So I think now that engagement that creators and their communities have got, I think that's a really unique way of continuing to educate people and just continue to share the kind of understanding of how various different topics impact people, and just making sure that everyone's doing all right. So yeah, I think it's an amazing platform to be able to create content for.
Kind of to touch on what you said about if you could talk to anyone, or you can talk to anyone on TikTok with Q&As. If you could talk to any environmental hero right now, who would you talk to?
I think obviously Greta and David Attenborough would be right up there, but I mean, personally, I think who I'd love to meet or love to hear more from are Indigenous peoples that are, basically on the front lines of climate change and environmental destruction. But are they have the least impact on the planet. They're the ones that have to basically fight these big corporations. Like, for instance, in America, the Native American tribes that basically fought off the Keystone pipeline that was going through their lands. And then also you have the Indigenous peoples in the Amazon rainforest who are fighting deforestation and, soybean farms and mining and all these other sort of threats to their way of life, and not only their way of life, but also their, their community and their land. So I would personally put those ones top, and just would love to meet more, Indigenous people that are basically we're the ones that are kind of on TikTok doing all this video content, but I'd really like to meet someone who is living it and breathing it and having to deal with it every day, because I'd love to hear what they have to say about it.
I think that's an important part of maybe what we didn't touch on the past question. Is the other issue with TikTok is that it is big in Europe and the UK and in parts of North America, but so many of the people who are most impacted by climate change won't have access to TikTok. So there's some really important voices that should be heard that won't necessarily be able to be heard. So I think people like Greta are amazing. David Attenborough, obviously amazing, but I'm sure there'll be other people with a stronger voice in as inspiring messages, who, given the right platform, would be able to inspire millions of other people from the backgrounds that they're from. So it'd be amazing if one day there's a way that we can kind of spread that reach a little bit more. But to the point about people who inspire me the most, at the moment, I am absolutely obsessed by, have you heard George's podcast by George the Poet? He has got such a unique way of telling stories. He does it all through like spoken word poetry. But he's so intelligent and talks about sustainability completely differently to anyone I ever heard. But equally, he packs in some really, really deep and impactful subjects, but in a really nice, approachable way. So on my lunchtime walks pretty much every day, I'm listening to his podcast at the moment. And he's just so inspirational in the way that he speaks. And it just really fills me with positive energy. So George the Poet would be
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next week. Bye.